I'm Kathleen Henderson from Roots and Boots, and a question I get a lot, especially when the topic of homeschooling comes up on my Instagram feed, in my stories, as people watch the way that my family goes about living our life, is about homeschooling. The question often is, what curriculum do you use? And then when people find out that we do not use a curriculum, it's kind of like, well, how does that work? So I wanted to share a little bit about that, and I'm sharing this video on YouTube so that I can refer those of you who have the same question to this material. It's a little bit off the cuff, it's a little bit off the top of my head, but I just got asked this question, and while it's fresh on my mind, I just wanted to speak to this a little bit and just encourage those of you who are feeling a pull either to homeschooling. Maybe you haven't started homeschooling yet, or you're a brand new homeschooler, or maybe you have been homeschooling, but you feel like maybe there could be a better way. Like maybe you're still feeling weighed down by mainstream institutional ways of thinking about education. So let me explain a little bit of our story of how we got from here to where we are now, and I'll try to give you some ideas of what we do now and how it works for us. And I also have some resources to recommend for you at the end. So even if you want to skip over the middle part and go directly to the resources, definitely check those out. So we have always homeschooled in kind of an out-of-the-box way. I see a lot of people homeschooling, and while I love to support homeschooling in general, I'm not a big fan of just bringing your children home and then doing at home pretty much the same thing that they would be doing in a school. For me, the whole point behind homeschooling my children was to do it differently, to have them at home, to have them involved in the daily rhythms of life, to have them learning life skills, to give them responsibilities around our home and allow them to be contributing members of our family, and to require certain things of them, and also to explore amazing and beautiful concepts in the world together. So for us, the big foundations of our homeschooling are simply reading and going outside. So from a very early age, when my oldest son was only about 2 or 3, this is when I first started thinking about homeschooling. Now, mind you, I was not homeschooled, my husband was not homeschooled, and honestly, for a while, we pretty much thought homeschoolers were weird and had no desire to homeschool. But I'll skip over the details of how I became interested in homeschooling, and it wasn't even that I was interested in homeschooling. I remember saying to my husband, I just feel like if we are going to eliminate this option from the list, we at least should have some good reasons. And then I was able to come into contact with a pretty cool homeschooling family, and it kind of planted the seed for me of like, maybe there's a different way, maybe there's a better way, maybe this could be a good fit for us. And as a former public high school teacher, I will tell you that a big part of what fueled my desire to keep my children, who are all boys, at home was the fact that I got to interact with and see and teach these high school boys as they came into I was a Spanish teacher, as they came into my high school Spanish classes. And do you know what I saw? I saw that there was like no light in their eyes. There was no life in them. They were just going through the motions. Same for a lot of the girls, but I think it's particularly impactful for boys who come in at a young age to school with still a lot of energy and a lot of wiggles and just a lot of impulses that are hard for them to control. And over time, I think that they begin to associate school and learning with this negative, like, I have to sit still, I can't move around much, I have to do what they want me to do. And I love to read and I love to learn. I am always so curious about all the things, and I wanted to pass that along to my kids. I didn't want to see that squelched in them, especially as boys. And so the closer that my oldest son got to that age of it's time to send him away to sit at a desk, the more I just felt in my heart like, no, I cannot do that. He needs to be free to play and explore, and I want to read beautiful, wonderful books with him. And so one of my first goals when he was just little was to find and identify what we now call living books. I am not talking about Magic School Bus. I am not talking about like licensed character books about Disney princesses. I'm not even talking about, when I talk about the Winnie the Pooh books, the original ones by A.A. Milne, those are not the same as the Disney-fied versions that you find in a lot of libraries and bookstores. So my quest was to identify living, life-giving books, and I have lists upon lists, and I have resources that I can share with you if you haven't found good lists yet, and that is a goal for you also. So we did lots and lots of reading, and then the other thing we did from a very early age was go outside often and just explore. When my oldest son was a toddler, like 1 and 2, we lived in the suburbs in Texas. We were not yet on our farm here in Northern Virginia, and we actually had no plans of being on a farm. I had no idea the turns that our life would take. But just in our little suburban neighborhood, we had sidewalks, and I was a new mom. I needed to get out of the house, and so I would, even in cold weather, as cold as it got in Texas, I would bundle up my little Malachi and put him in our jogging stroller, and we would go out on walks, and I called them touch and feel walks. And we would just, I kind of gave up the idea of like power walking for exercise. I was able to get that in here and there, but I just kind of had this mindset of let's stop and touch and feel and like listen, examine, observe everything that we can. So I remember there were like railroad ties next, like retaining walls next to part of our walk, and we would stop and we would feel the retaining walls and look at it, and sometimes there would be bugs there, and we would just watch and talk about it, and we would do that as we walked past plants and trees and anything, even a fire hydrant, anything that we could touch or feel and talk about, like that's cold, that's smooth, that's rough, that's soft, that smells good, I don't like that smell, and just introducing him to this beautiful world of like there are things to discover and enjoy. And we would do that at parks too, but I remember specifically because we did it so often, walking around our neighborhood like that. And we just carried that same spirit into our homeschooling of let's read, like what are we going to read today, and diving into these beautiful stories that teach children and give them a way to just imagine and expose them to places and ideas that are outside their normal daily frame of reference. And so I like to tell people in regards to homeschooling, and I'm totally serious about this, that if you bring your kids home and the only thing you do with them ever is read to them great literature, and I'm talking from a young age, from picture books up to chapter books and beyond, read to them and take them outside, they will have a far superior education than they could ever receive in a public school for sure here in the United States. And I really do believe that. So those are the foundations for us. Of course, we have added other things. We follow Charlotte Mason methods, and we adhered to Charlotte Mason methods much more specifically when my children were younger and before we moved to the farm. For us, there's been an evolution. We've kind of morphed. Our homeschooling has morphed as we transitioned to our farm, and as my children grew older, I realized that I could not sustain such a rigorous academic list of goals for my kids and also accomplish all of our objectives here on the farm. So my children have many responsibilities around our farm, and I should back it up and say, if you don't live on a farm, and before we lived on a farm, the way that we began this part of the process was to give our children chores and invite them to contribute to the household and to our family. And as they grew older, those responsibilities grew also. One example is that when my oldest son was, I think, about 10 or 11, one of the things, as we were examining, my husband and I were examining all the things on my plate, and I was honestly feeling a little overwhelmed. I still had, you know, young children, and we were homeschooling, and we were doing gardening and food preservation and things at that point. And I've also had some health challenges. So at times I haven't had as much energy, and I've struggled with sleeping and things like that. And it was just a time when I was feeling very overwhelmed with all that was on my plate. And my husband and I examined this together and looked for some solutions. And one of the solutions was, if I didn't have to make breakfast every morning, that would be a huge blessing to me. But I still wanted to make sure that we were eating a good, healthy breakfast. You know, it's the most important meal of the day. So my oldest son was about 10 or 11, and we decided that we would start training him how to make breakfast. So we started just with simple things like scrambling eggs, and then eventually worked our way up to now he's 16. Since that time, he has made breakfast every morning, and now he makes like much more elaborate recipes. And sometimes we bring in new recipes, and I'm always consulting him. I always make the meal plan for our week, but I always consult him. Like, what would you like to make this week? What haven't we had in a while? Or, you know, what feels easy? There are certain days of the week when I want to give him something really easy to make because of other things going on around the farm. And so we look at that together every week, mostly me, but I'll ask him, you know, what do you want to make this week? And when I come across new recipes, I'll show it to him and say, like, this seems like something that would work well for us. Like, what do you think? And he'll be like, yeah, I want to try that. I mean, just this morning, he tried something new that we had seen together, omelets, where you crack 2 eggs into a pan and make like the flat kind of crepe, and then you add the fillings like they do if you've ever been to like a hotel fancy buffet omelet bar. And then you put the fillings in, and then they fold the egg over, or they serve it like that at a lot of restaurants, right? So actually, I think that's where we did see it, is when I took him out for breakfast for his 16th birthday, and he was like, I could do this at home, that would be fun. And so he talked about like all the ingredients, and so we planned that for this morning. And when I came out to the kitchen, he already had bowls of different ingredients that he had chopped and was thinking through. He likes to be creative. So, and he's also discovered kind of a love for culinary things. I don't know that that's something that he'll like pursue as a career, but that's a life skill that he would have never had if we hadn't required him to make breakfast. And when I say required, I do want to encourage you, when you're introducing these responsibilities to your children, is to treat it like a privilege and treat it like a rite of passage. And like, now that you're 10, you know, you are able to do so much more, and you are old enough now to start cooking in the kitchen. And, you know, first we're going to teach you how to scramble eggs, and this is going to be great because one day when you go off and live on your own or have your own family, you're going to know how to prepare some food for yourself so you can eat. So these are the kind of things that we're always working in. Like, now you're old enough and your responsibilities are shifting a little bit, and we're going to give you this new responsibility. And sometimes, you know, certain responsibilities get passed to the next younger brother, although our youngest son noticed this trend and was like, wait a minute, there's no one behind me to pass off these chores to. Like, am I going to be stuck doing some of these chores for the rest of my life? So we'll have to work through all of that with him. We obviously can't keep passing all the chores down to the youngest. But we're always evaluating, like, what are the natural bents of each kid? Like, what do they kind of lean towards, and then try to tailor some of the responsibilities to those interests. But there are also chores, you know, we all have to do chores that we don't necessarily love or have interest in, but we need to learn how to do them. And it's okay to expect our kids to do that. And I feel like that's a part of our homeschooling experience. You know, if my kids were going off to school all day, every day, then they wouldn't have time to help around the house as much. And it's a huge blessing to me that they're able to help. And I see it building character in their lives, and it gives me the peace of mind and the comfort knowing that they have been trained how to do these things, so they will be able to do them later when they are on their own or they have their own families. So those are 3 big foundations: is identifying wonderful living books and reading often, every day. Have multiple books going. Have, when they're little, have times, reading times. Like, we used to do certain readings at the breakfast table. We did certain readings at nap time when they were going down for their naps. We did certain readings at bedtime, and we had certain readings that we did all together as a family whenever we were able to do that. We also listened to tons of audiobooks in the car. At one time we tried to keep track of, like, make a record of each audio story and each book that we read aloud. Sometimes I get good at tracking those, and sometimes we just we just don't. So, but if I counted them all up and looked at all of the audiobooks that we've listened to in the car together as a family, and all the books that we've read aloud together as a family, or me with the boys, or my husband with the boys, we have logged many, many hours listening to wonderful biographies, fantasies, just delightful works of fiction. And again, I'm talking all the way from picture books. There are beautiful, amazing, wonderful picture books for the very littlest, all the way up to chapter books and things that we are listening to and reading now. So books, and then nature. And again, that has evolved for us over time. We used to go out on explorations. We used to go hiking. We teamed up with another family who was homeschooling that had kids similar ages to my own children, and the moms got along well. And they're some of our dearest friends to this day. When they were very little, the kids, we would go out more often together, and as they grew older and had more responsibilities with their studies and with their just household activities, then we tapered off to less frequently, probably about once a month. But we made that a priority to get out and explore together. We had some spots that we would go to. Over the years, we would revisit those same places, and it was always interesting to see them in different seasons of the year. Like sometimes we would go to this one place in spring, sometimes we would be there in winter, summer, fall, etc. And it was really cool for the kids to be able to see and notice the different changes, experience one same place across multiple seasons. And then as we moved to the farm, now there's been a shift to where we feel like we are in nature a lot here on the farm. And so we don't necessarily get out as often for official nature explorations, but we are constantly enjoying nature. For example, there is a horse farm around the corner from us where we got to know the gal because we were getting free composted horse manure from her for our gardens. But she also has a pond, and she said, oh, you know, the boys should come fishing. And that was something I had to work through as a mom, because there's a busy road with some traffic that the boys have to walk along in order to get to her farm. And I wasn't sure, especially about my youngest son, but I just had to come to a place where I had to entrust them to God, their safety to God, and say, like, it's time for me to practice what I preach. Like, I really value independence for kids, and I really value them having experiences like this. And so I said, okay, then I need to practice what I preach and let them walk the 15 minutes to that pond where they can fish. We don't have a pond here for them to fish, and I want that for them. So they have, and that's been a process for all of us, and they do it safely, and the youngest has to be with his older brothers, but they do it on their own. And my oldest goes over there all the time. They would walk, and sometimes they ride their bikes. And that's been a great experience for them. But so always looking for ways for them to enjoy nature and explore nature. We do still go on family outings. We do still go on outings with friends to explore, you know, hikes. And we went at a certain time of year to see this one kind of flower that blooms every spring here in our area. It's kind of a special thing to go see, and so we found a specific hike that we could do. We have some hikes that have waterfalls, but always looking for ways to get kids out in nature and to encourage their observation. So all along we have done nature studies. You can look into specific Charlotte Mason methodology, guidance and instructions for how to do nature study. We have done that all along. Sorry, I feel like I keep talking in circles, but the three main foundations that I'm trying to suggest to you are reading wonderful books, going out into nature, and introducing responsibilities, chores, life skills for your children. So let's talk a little bit more about life skills. So what I recommend is, no matter what your situation, maybe you don't live on a farm, maybe it feels more challenging to you to think about how could the kids contribute to the household. Although I felt like even before we lived on the farm, there were so many ways that kids can contribute. From toddler age, I started teaching my sons how to make their bed. And did they do it perfectly? No, but you teach them to pull up the covers and put their pillows on, and, you know, and stand back and say, this is a good job. Like, admire their work and praise them for that. And from a very young age, a job at our house has been to empty the trash. All the trash cans in the bedrooms and the bathrooms, bring them, actually they empty them into one trash can and then bring that one to the kitchen, the main trash. But empty all the trash. help fold laundry. Little kids can fold square things like washcloths and kitchen towels and kitchen rags, and they can match up socks. And then eventually you can teach them how to fold shirts and other articles of clothing. Again, does this happen perfectly? No. I had to let go of my standards. I really like neatly folded everything. Now, what we landed on was I still fold my own laundry, and my husband's bigger, like, I don't know about you, but my husband wears the biggest shirts of our family, at least so far. I think my oldest son is catching up to him. But it can be hard for a little person to fold like a grown man's t-shirt. That's a lot of fabric to work with. So I have usually folded my own and my husband's own laundry, but the child in charge of folding folds certain things. And what we've actually landed on now more recently is that all three of the boys fold their own laundry, and so my youngest is the laundry folder at our house. So what he does with his brother's clothing is he just sorts that into a bin and then gives them the bin, and then they have to fold it and put away. But my youngest folds his own clothes, and he folds all of the towel cloth stuff in our house. We do not use paper towels, so we have a lot of kitchen or household cloth, napkins and dish towels and rags, and then we have a rag bin and all of that. So he folds all of those things, and that's something that young children can begin to do. And then you can begin to teach them kitchen skills. So I would recommend identifying, like maybe making a list of household jobs, and then identifying which are some jobs that can be passed off to the children and train them to do. And then as kids get older, or if you have older kids, you know, identify what are some skills they're gonna need when they go out into the world, and what are some skills that would be a help to your family. And specifically for kitchen skills, one thing I've noticed is that since my oldest has become trained in making breakfast for us every morning, I had kind of forgotten about my middle child, and just realized recently that I need to be on the stick about teaching him kitchen skills. Just because he doesn't make breakfast every day doesn't mean he can't have kitchen responsibilities. He does have kitchen responsibilities, but he had never really been responsible for like an entire meal. And so what we've started working on with him is some lunchtime training. I've identified a few of our most simple recipes that can work for a lunch or a dinner. And for lunchtime, I've started training him. This is how we make this one dish. This is how we make this other dish. So first, he kind of does it with me while I do it, and I walk him through, I explain what I'm doing. And then the next time I say, okay, this time you're gonna do it, and I'm gonna be nearby, like, to give you guidance. And then we might do that a couple times. And then the next step is that he makes it independently, but I'm still accessible. There have even been times when I've been out in the garden with a walkie-talkie, and my middle guy is radioing me on the walkie-talkie saying, okay, now how do I chop this, and like how many of this do I use, and I'm able to walk him through it, but he knows the steps and he can do it himself. So those are things that we're constantly striving towards with our kids, is identifying life skills that are already present in our household and transferring those jobs to those children gradually. You know, it's a training process, and we don't expect perfection at the beginning, but we do expect progress. And a lot of it comes down to just realizing that your kids are capable of so much more than you probably even realize. And if you communicate that to them, if you are constantly communicating to your kids that they are able, that they are capable, and treating them as real contributing members of the family, like, wow, you know, praising their efforts and pointing out to them what they were able to accomplish, they will step up, they will rise to the occasion, and you are giving them a gift of these skills that they can take with them into life. So after those three foundations of reading and nature and life skills and responsibilities, how do we fit in all the other things? So what works for us on the farm is that our school year is very short. We are blowing and going through the spring growing season, the summer planting, harvesting, and fall harvesting and preserving. And so our school year typically runs from October-ish until March, April-ish. And so we kind of ease in October, and in March, April, we start easing out because we are starting to add in things like seed starting and planting and mulching, and then the mowing starts back up again and all of that. And in the fall, as my food preservation responsibilities start to taper off and we're not working as much in the garden, then we start to ease into more of our lessons, is what we call them. So for us, what this looks like is each child has a math that they're working on. I have one child who works with a tutor virtually. They meet twice a week via Zoom, and he has work that he completes in between. And I have another child who really loves math and does very well independently, and he has an online math program that he uses, and he goes through it independently. He's very motivated because he enjoys the subject, and he's doing great with that. And then my youngest, I do math with him. It's a very simple elementary math that is very Charlotte Mason-esque. And then they also, the older two have many books that they are working through, and so every day they do some readings. They're constantly rotating through this whole list of books until they finish a book, and then a new book comes into the rotation. So they're constantly reading these books, and based on their readings, they do a variety of telling back to me what they read. That's called narration. It's a Charlotte Mason method. So they narrate back to me either orally, or as they've gotten older, now I require them to write down a narration each day. These books that they're reading cover the whole gamut of subjects and topics, from chemistry to history to literature to other sciences to economics to civics to faith and God. And they are reading all of these things and then digesting it, and narrating it back either orally or in written form. Then what we also do now is we have at least one day a week, usually two, especially during the colder months when we're not doing as many outdoor activities on our farm. We have what we call together lessons, and it's just in the morning, all four of us, me and the three boys, sitting down together. And I have quite an age range. I have a 16-year-old down to an 8-year-old, but there are things that we do together, and these are very Charlotte Mason-esque studies, and they include composer study, artist study, hymns, folk songs. We use a catechism. We do Spanish. And we also have begun a kind of politics, civics, government aspect, where we began with studying the Declaration of Independence, and now we have moved into the Constitution, and poetry, and nature study, nature drawing. So, and geography. Sorry, I should have written all of this down before I tried to do this video. But we work our way just a little bit at a time. One thing about Charlotte Mason methods is that you keep the lessons very short and engaging. And I don't even like to use the word lessons, because it's not like I'm sitting down and pre-planning something to teach them. In Charlotte Mason methods, the mom or the teacher is a guide, a facilitator, and not so much like a talking head expert or a teacher. So we sit down together and we just learn together. So for instance, we will sing the hymns that we're working on. We will recite the poetry or the scripture passage or for instance, the Declaration of Independence. We will recite that together. We will spend about 15 minutes studying a composer and listening to a work that he composed and reading a little bit about his life. We will spend some time studying paintings and works by famous artists and learning about that artist's life. And this doesn't take very long. I'm talking 15-20 minutes on each topic, and we move through it pretty quickly, and it keeps it interesting and engaging. And we do that, like I said, about twice a week together, sometimes only once a week. And it's amazing how much we've gotten through over the years. And what I love about it is it opens their eyes to all of these things and all of these possibilities. Like, maybe they can grow up and be a painter. Maybe they can grow up and be a composer. Maybe not. Maybe they're never going to do those things. Maybe they're never going to be a famous poet. or a famous government leader, but it gives them a foundation in all of these areas, and it gives them relationships with the world. That's a big thing in the Charlotte Mason world, is that the children, it's not that we're trying to teach them specific things or have them like know these certain things by the time they are finished with their education, but we are trying to lay the feast, and we are allowing them to form relationships. So we expose them to these ideas and these concepts, and then they make the relationships. Like, oh, you know, each child is different, and they make different relationships with different information and between the different types of information, and that is learning. Learning is not memorizing things from a textbook. It's not, you know, being able to do certain math functions. Learning is simply forming relationships with information. And I bet that more than half of what you learned in school, if you went to school growing up, you don't remember because you did not form any kind of relationship with that. But when you have the opportunity to form relationships with what you are learning, because it somehow relates to your life or to something else that you know or to something that's meaningful to you, that's when you learn and remember. And that's the kind of learning that I want for my kids. So I want to encourage you to let go of this notion of education, that education consists of like these topics, these subjects, and like these specific pieces of information. What does that even mean? Let go of the whole idea of passing a test in order to prove your knowledge. For me, my goal is to allow my children the opportunity to experience and appreciate and value the world around them, and to help them discover their particular bents. What are they really interested in? What kinds of things are most meaningful to them? And to grow up to become people who know about a lot of things, in that they can converse with different kinds of people on different kinds of topics, and have a good foundation for just common sense living. That's one reason why we like to study civics and government, so they can understand like how our country began and some of mistakes from history, and you know, our rights and our freedoms, and so they can help to be those people who are vigilant going forward about protecting those rights and freedoms. But I want them to have a broad understanding of the world at large, but it's not that I'm trying to cram any certain details into them. Do I want them to know how to read? Yes, but every child learns to read in his own timing. There is no magic age, and it's definitely probably not as early of an age as what is thrust upon typical kids in typical school situations in our country. The children will learn to read. I guarantee it. If you read them amazing literature every day, they will learn to read, even if you don't teach them. But you can teach them. Just be careful to do it in a very gentle way, and only when they're ready. You know, do I want them to learn how to read? Of course. Do I want them to have basic math skills? Of course. But here's where I'm going to recommend some resources. So if you are looking for good book lists to help you identify living books, I'm going to put a few of my favorite resources for finding good books in the description below. What I was going to recommend is, if you need help kind of unlearning what you knew or know about education and what it entails, and become more comfortable with just embracing learning on a more holistic level, I want to encourage you to read Dr. Peter Gray. He has written a number of books about unschooling. I know that word can have a negative connotation for a lot of us. It did for me before I read his books, but I found his books to be so encouraging. He's a very educated, smart, thoughtful, insightful guy. He has a PhD in psychology, and in fact has written a psychology textbook that many universities use for their psychology classes across the nation. But he has studied and observed a lot of interesting things about education, and he has some really helpful things to say about the concept of unschooling. So while I will probably never be a complete unschooler, I definitely have moved more in that direction because I see it as so life-giving and liberating to be freed from the constraints of what some people have labeled an education. Like, what is education really? And when is a child considered fully educated? None of us are ever fully educated. So I want my children to have a love for reading, a love for nature. I want them to have life skills. I want them to know some things about the broader world. And I want them to have a desire to learn and a curiosity and a zest for life that they carry with them, because if I can give them that, they can learn anything they need to learn later on for any specific purpose that they might need specific information for. I will also include a few resources that we use for some of the things that I've mentioned, like studying artists and studying composers and poetry and folk songs and all of that. I will include all of that down in the description for you if that's helpful for you. Check that out. So if you've stuck with me to the very end of this, I hope that is helpful for you. I hope it inspires you to step away from some of those mainstream ways of thinking about education and to open yourself up to the possibilities that are there if you are brave enough to step out and embrace this type of learning and living for your kids.